the Muslims against the Hebrew Israelite. All this mess that started then is still going on now is because we are schizophrenic. Our minds are split, schizoid. We are not one self as we're supposed to be. You see, the unity, the commonality, you see, commonality, unity does not mean uniformity. Everybody doesn't look alike. In fact, a part of what makes the unity so deep is that everybody is bringing in a unique contribution to the unity. So you got different colors, you got different sizes, you got different movements, you got different rhythms, you got different tones, you got different levels, everything. And that's coming together and moving in a common direction makes that force a powerful and effective force, and that's the real source of our effectiveness as a community. But the idea is that if you bust that up and begin to make the elements fight against each other, then you lose the power of a united mind, a united African movement. You can't get people to move in a united way unless they understand their connectedness. And the fact that I have no self without the self of my children, without the self of my mother, without the self of my wife, without the self of those things that make up my family and my community. You are a part of me. I have no reality without you. So this idea of the social self is something that is the uniquely African contribution to the whole thing. So you have two dimensions now. And in the book, Know Thyself has a diagram of it. The lowest dimension is the dimension of the personal, physical self. Me, my, I. But that self is tiny compared to the social self, which makes all of us a self, a personality, a being that transcends our individuality. So we continue to live as long as the community lives. One of the things that we used to do, let me just give another example of this. You've heard of the extended family. The fact that this notion that Hillary Clinton stole from Africa about it takes a village to raise a child. She didn't steal it. She said where she got it from. But white folks started quoting her as if she made up this proverb. But this idea of it takes a village to raise a child is this recognition that as a community, we always understood it ain't your children. You don't have children by yourself. Your children are my children. The children belong to me. The women of our communities, they are our women. Not in their physical individuality, but the extent to which they need the support, the companionship, and the maxed energy of a male energy force. I am that male, they are my women. Simultaneously, I am their man. Not in a simple, physical, carnal way, but we constitute a connectedness. And that's why when they busted up our families, they thought they messed us up, but we continue to grow and thrive and build and raise children and support each other and raise our children with an understanding of who they were, even on the plantations, because they had busted up the individual nuclear family, but they couldn't bust up the village and the community that held us all together. And that's the power of this thing. We got in trouble when we started imitating white folks. When we decided we wanted to be just like Father Knows Best. We wanted to have us a nuclear family. Don't you put your hand on my child. What you mean, your child? This child has a need. This is our child. This child is in trouble. This is our child. This child has the need to be educated. This is our child. And as long as we thought that way, we were all right. But when it became mine, and when you begin to pull back into these little insulated enclaves locked up in your apartment with your own biological kin, then you started developing some real problems. Because when we were a community, there was no such thing as father absence. Because as long as there was a man anywhere, there was a father around somewhere. As long as there was. No such thing as orphans. Children were always absorbed back into the community, because even if mama and biological daddy died, somebody had a love for those children, would bring those children in, and they'd be a part of the community. But then we came along with all these laws about separate orphanages and who's going to get the adoption rights and who will go into foster care and who has the biological right to be responsible for this and who has the sole responsibility for the child, and how do you begin to preserve the individual rights of that child's responsibility, and who has all that old crap, which is European isolationism, was the source of our difficulty. And when we started imitating that, thinking we were healthy buppies and bourgeoisie, then we began to lose contact with the power we had as a community. That's number two. Number three, in terms of the third dimension, you see, I'm expanding this concept of the self. And it's going bigger and bigger, and we wanted you to understand that all of it's you. All of it's you. Because you as an individual, you as the social piece, and then thirdly, you as a part of the tribal self. What is the tribal self? The tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social group. The family, the people you know who live next door, your neighbors, the people who are members of UAM, people whose faces you know, that constitute the collective community as you know it in that sense. That's a broader sense, but when we start talking about the tribal self, I'm talking about those living, those yet unborn, and those who are the ancestors. So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self. What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us that we don't have the right to claim independence of the history of which we are a part. So don't nobody care that you individually weren't a slave in South Carolina. The tribe was enslaved. So therefore, you were enslaved. You understand? You don't have the right to say, well, I came from Barbados, and in Barbados we did work on the plantations, and when we were in Bermuda, we were doing it in Bermuda, and I'm somehow different. I've got my own. You were a slave because the tribe was enslaved in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Bermuda, in Bahia, in Central America, in Guyana. Every place on this planet, you Africans were enslaved. So part of the tribal self is this trauma of the plantation. You don't walk around pretending you weren't there. Well, individually, none of us were there. But had we not been there, we would not be here. You see, because we were there, we therefore can be here. We have to remember this because this is our empowerment. You see, when they broke our connection with the ancestors, we lost the understanding that they are always with us. You see, Africans have no concept of death in the simple carnal sense of Europeans. And it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or whatever. The idea is that in the African philosophy of life, you continue to live in the community, whether you are in flesh or have been able to transcend the flesh. Africans understand you are a part of the community before you get here, while you're here, and when you leave, because you don't ever leave the community. We are still doing the work of Imhotep. We are still a part of the tradition of the tribe of Ramesses. We are still involved in the great work of Obatashaka. We are still, of Shaka Zulu. We are still involved in the mighty work of those people who struggle here. We are still a part of the work of Harriet Tubman and of Denmark Vesey or Frederick Douglass and all the rest of those who gave so much. But you see, they wanted to make us believe that we were in violation of our concept of monotheism by appreciating that Africans continue to be a part of the community. Libation was a ritual of memory. It's a way to invoke consciousness. You see, when you remember the ancestors, you actually reinvent them, you recreate them, you bring them back into this place, into this time, and the energies and the power that they had is brought back into this moment. You know, this isn't strange now. Listen, even Europeans now claim that the power of resistance to many diseases and resistance to many problems is because those diseases were defeated by the ancestors. They call it genetic immunity. They talk about how previous generations have already conquered certain diseases, so that immunity is passed on from one generation to the next. And of course, since these people are so physical that they can't see with the other eye, they only look for physical explanations. They're looking for genes and DNA and some kind of biochemical. But the bottom line is that we are spiritually containing everything that has gone before. We are it. The only thing that's not here is what didn't make it. But everything that survived is here in us. That's why we represent the accumulation of the greatest possibilities of human life on this planet. The fact that slavery kicked our butt, but we survived it. Therefore, we've come out of it with greater power than anybody else on this earth. We are a tribe. Now you say, well, like, what about those of us who mix? I got some Iroquois in me, I got some Blackfoot and some Creek in me. In fact, my great-great-granddad was a Scotsman, and I got some Irish in me too. Well, that's your problem. You understand? Those ancestors are being remembered in the culture. The European culture is constantly remembering their ancestors. Why do you think you got a pocket full of dead white presidents? That's European ancestral worship. Why do you think they've got all these white folks' pictures in every courthouse and all the universities and the corporate headquarters? You come in there, big dead white folks all over the wall. And they are always being reminded that the ancestors are here. And then you start getting strange and peculiar. Well, I don't do this ancestor thing. I don't worship my ancestors. Well, you're the only one. You see, that's why you are so weak. Because you've lost connection with the angels. You've lost connection with the jinns. You've lost connection with the spiritual entities that were sent as intermediaries to do the work of the divine creator who used human beings to serve as the vessel for making things happen. When you lose memory, then you don't know, not only can you slam dunk a basketball, you can slam dunk the planet through the circle of time. You don't realize that the same healing power that Imhotep have, we still have. You don't realize that the mathematical and architectural minds that built the pyramids based on a spiritual blueprint are still operating with us. You don't realize that the powerlessness of our enemies who attacked our bodies but didn't bother to somehow destroy our minds, their power continues only as long as we give them the power over our bodies and abdicate the power of our minds. We don't understand who we are because we have forgotten. We have forgotten the tribal self. Now, you see, the work of Brother Rashidi and Van Sertima and Chancellor Williams and the great elder who's now an ancestor, John Henry Clark, and all of these brilliant scholars, why is their work so important? They have been engaged in reviving the memory of the ancestors. That's what history is. You see, history in and of itself, as a chronicle of events, as dates and locations, is not significant. It is significant only if you know the connection between those events and you. That's why the slave makers erased the consciousness of the African contributors to the building of this civilization. That's why they did that. They didn't want you to know that you helped lay the foundation for civilized life. They didn't want you to know that the concept of family was generated by African people. They didn't want you to know that the concept of the relationship to the creator of the universe and the understanding that the human being is made of immortal substance that cannot be destroyed, that transcends time and space. They didn't want you to know that that concept was first formulated by African people. They didn't want you to know that long before Osiris resurrected from the dead, long before Jesus resurrected from the dead, Osiris or Osir had already gotten up from the dead and was able to be the ruler of the heavens and earth. They don't want you to know that the woman called Mary was in fact a replication of the woman called Osset or called Isis, who was able to bring forth a virgin child out of the relationship between the divine spiritual being of who she was, and to reconstitute life and start it again by her own search, perseverance, and higher power. They don't want you to understand that those are African concepts. They don't want you to know that the whole planet is an African colony. They don't want you to know the role that we play. The reason that they don't want you to know that is because by not knowing that, you lose your connection with the ancestors. And what happens? They keep theirs, so they tell you about Columbus. What are their ancestors? Tell you about Washington, the father of the country. What are their ancestors? Shakespeare, ancestors. Mozart, ancestor. Chopin, ancestor. All their ancestors, they're always talking about their ancestors. But they don't tell you about your ancestors. And idea, but they understood the responsibility of motherhood as being a divinely inspired possibility to be able to bring life through you as a vessel, understanding that you were a reflection of the life that was held in you, and you were able to replicate that process by bringing life out of your body, which is actually the living spirit of life that was placed in you. That was the power of understanding motherhood. It is actually an African derivative of the word saku, which to D.C., to Florida, to Canada, there are people who are very familiar, very kind, very loving, and certainly I understand the nature of this extended family which we are all a part of. We must understand that we are dedicated and devoted to growth. The biomedical, the biochemical, and even the biospiritual in ways we never understood. Listen, otherwise we will face the symbolism. So a bigger picture than that. We've often talked about this thing that African people have, that is we refer to as the basis of African ontology, is I am because we are. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we are socialist? No, not in the political sense of the word. We don't give any kind of preeminence to the state. But there is this undeniable, intractable interconnection that African people hold with each other. There's a strong sense that we are because we are. There's a strong sense that we have no sense of ourselves unless we are hooked up with the community. Visual representation of knowledge, enlightenment, trained scientifically, even the stone that has stood for these thousands of years. If we're not talking about something bigger than a pyramid that stands in the middle of a desert where Arabs run around getting your dollars and dimes to ride on camels to look at the stones you put together. If it ain't no bigger than that, let's just get a plane ticket and be black. But if it is bigger than that, that means that we've got to use the symbols as access to the higher power that's ours.
Reach out to our brothers and sisters.
Let's represent a condensation of the 41 negative confessions, then that must mean they must still be correct. Now, we didn't say they belong to the Jews. All we're saying is that the source is wrong, you see. So if the principles of spiritual development that is identified in religious systems are, in fact, of the same origin that we say they are, then if we have no comparable mechanisms, must then draw upon those systems that will help us advance ourselves spiritually. Okay? Now, if that's the case, then let's look at some of those things. Now, every one of these religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, speaks very highly of the need for fasting as a mechanism of spiritual advancement. Every one. Not only do all the religious books say it, And of course, we know it's in the Eastern or Oriental religions too. But it's also taught by all of the metaphysicists. All of those people who teach metaphysical growth tell us the benefits of fasting, you see. Now, if fasting then works, why not fast? You see, and start worrying about, well, that's in the Bible. So what? It's a lot of good stuff in the Bible. There's a lot of good stuff in the Quran. And if you wise fool, take out the wisdom and leave the mess. I only maintain that the mechanism, as I said in my presentation, the mechanism of intuition and consciousness, and conscience is contained in the melanin mechanism. There were other things that I did that were fun, you know, and it was a struggle. But at the point that I decided that, okay, I'm going to try to do this, that decision for me opened up the beginning of the kind of growth that I've continued to go on.